Today, we have another 10x DNA portfolio company, a very, very deep tech, very interesting company. Paul, as our 3D expert, is with me, but without further ado, I say hello to Benny from Velo3D.
Good morning, good afternoon in Germany.
Yes, thank you for dialing in from the US. So maybe we start, of course, at the beginning. Tell our listeners a little bit about Velo3D. What are you doing? What's your products?
Yeah, so Velo3D makes industrial metal 3D printers for production applications, industries like aerospace, energy, power generation. What we make are printers for very large scale, so objects that are almost 1 cubic meter in size, with very high precision, with very fine details. And specifically, it allows companies to make objects that would before be made from tens or even hundreds of components, making them as a one piece, single component, allowing them much faster time to market, much faster production times, lower costs as part of this as well.
That's great, and we will dive into all these advantages and also how you specialize in the 3D printing industry. So what makes you special even in that in this new industry? But as far as I heard, there's a quite interesting story about you and being an investor and then becoming a founder or CEO. Maybe you can give us a little background about the history of the company.
Sure. So I'm a physicist myself, a physicist and a system engineer. I grew up in Israel, served in the technology unit of the Israeli intelligence for about 10 years, immigrated to the United States to work in semiconductor industry on capital equipment. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to start a company. I married early. I had kids early, and my wife absolutely put a veto on this as long as I had young kids. And then in my early 40s, the kids were starting to get out of the home, and I started to think seriously about this again. I joined a venture capital firm, so one of the top venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, Khosla Ventures. I worked there for just under 2 years, and then I started to think very seriously about which companies to, which industry, which area to work in. And to be frank, my initial assessment was that, and this was an assessment that I made as an investor, that I will never invest in 3D printing. I didn't really seriously think about going into 3D printing. And then the opportunity arrived and really knocked on my door. And the opportunity was that I stumbled upon a company that was making rocket engines. And this company was trying to 3D print their parts. And it took them a very, very long time to 3D print the parts. And this was completely contrary to what I thought about 3D printing. So when you are outside of 3D printing, you think of 3D printing as this magical technology that you press a button and then you take a file, you send it to a printer, you press a button, and boom, a few hours later you have your parts. It turns out that in metal, this is far from being the case. The technology is very limited. And the complexity of making a part using metal 3D printing is extremely high, requires a lot of expertise. And when I learned about these limitations, I basically said, well, there must be a better way to do that. I don't know exactly what the way to do that, but that's what we are going to do. And I started a company to actually make the technology what everyone from the outside think it already is, but it wasn't.
Wow. Impressive story. So let's dive into the technology.
Yeah, more into the technology and also the market. So maybe we start with the technology. So the technology Velo3D is using is laser powder bed fusion. Benny, maybe could you explain to us how this technology works and what's maybe the difference to other 3D printing technologies in the metal field?
Yeah, so laser powder bed fusion actually is a very established technology. And it was invented, in fact, in Germany about 30 years ago in Munich or near Munich. and really perfected by a lot of companies in Europe. And the idea behind it is you basically have a cylinder or a piston that is carrying a powder bed. You can think of that as a big sandbox, but instead of sandbox, it's a powder box. And every step of the process, the piston is stepping down one thickness of a layer, and then you are refilling this powder bed or sandbox with a fresh layer of powder coming back to the same height. And then a laser is melting the powder in all the places where you want the part to be. Less than a millisecond after the laser passes over the powder, the places where the laser passed are already solid, and you basically keep going this way in one layer after another. The piston goes down, you refill the powder bed with a fresh layer of powder, recoat it, and then you melt the places where the part's supposed to be. And this fundamental process allows you to make extremely complex parts. And in fact, it is the closest thing to the ideal 3D printer. And what I mean by ideal 3D printer is, if you think about ideal 2D printer, an ideal 2D printer is a printer that can make any combination of shapes on a page of 2 dimensions with a minimum resolution required and a maximum page size. In a similar way, an ideal 3D printer is a printer that can build any combination of, if you want, voxels or 3-dimensional pixels in space, if you can, within a minimum resolution and a maximum envelope. The problem with this technology is that when you are printing metals, it's actually more complicated than that. And when you're printing metals, you cannot just print metals in general whenever you want in the powder bed. Every point in the metal has to be connected to a previous point, has to be connected to the plate, if you want, to the base of the piston from which you're growing the parts. So you're really growing the parts from some base. And this puts a lot of fundamental limitations on the technology, because if you think about the parts that you will want to build using 3D printing, a lot of the parts you would like to print are parts that have very complex internal geometries, and those parts would require these internal support structures that make sure that every point is already connected to previous points. And in general, a lot of those internal support structures are not easy or impossible to remove, making a lot of the parts that you would build not usable.
Yeah, for sure. And you already mentioned like the technology on its own is like pretty old, or like more than 30 years old. What's now special about like Velo3D's machines? So maybe we can start with the hardware and then later on continue with the software, right? But what's making Velo3D different?
Yeah, so the fundamental challenge of this technology is that the parts that are the most interesting parts to make using this technology are parts that have complex internal structures. The reason why this is the case is because there is already a very fine and very precise and almost perfect manufacturing technology for metals, and that's called CNC machining or milling. And basically, this is a computerized mill that is completely controlled by a computer. Today, there are 5-axis, 7-axis, 11-axis machines, and those machines can basically, in one setup, make the most complicated of parts, presuming you can reach this part from the outside. So if you can reach the part from the outside, every point on the outside, you can really make these parts as complicated as you want.
So just to explain to our listeners, it's a big block, and then the mills go inside and basically subtract material, and that's how many manufacturing places work today. So big block where I start, and then I take metal away.
Exactly, and just to go one step beyond the big block, you can start with a big block or a big plate or whatever is the shape, but you can also start with a cylinder or a ring or some other shape that is already closer to what you are trying to make, and it reduces by a lot the amount of material that you use and the amount of material that you want to remove.
Definitely, yes.
Now, with 3D printing, the most natural things that you would like to do with 3D printings are these complex structures that CNC machine cannot actually reach out to be able to do from within. And a lot of those complex parts that a CNC machine cannot mill would require, by conventional 3D printing, these internal support structures. These internal support structures that would not be possible to remove. So if you kind of look at the fundamental reason why support structures are needed in metal 3D printing, the fundamental reason is that when a metal is liquefied on the top of an existing metal, and when this metal solidifies as the laser passes above that, this metal starts to be held at place at the temperature that it freezes. And for typical metals, I think of steels, you are talking about somewhere in the vicinity of 1500 degrees Celsius, 1,500 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
From that moment on, the metal is held at place, but now it starts to cool down. As it starts to cool down and it reaches the temperature of the rest of the part, it shrinks, but it's already held in place. As it's held in place and shrinks, it puts the top layer of the metal in a very, very high tension, causes it to warp up. And this warpage is really the killer of metal 3D printing, because what happens is that you are building usually with very, very thin layers.
Yeah.
And as you are adding one layer on top of each other, if you have a warpage, and the warpage could be relatively high, this warped metal is now going to collide with the recoater as you are putting the next layers of powder, and it's going to disturb the operation of the recoater in the next layer of powder. And the result is that either you're going to distort the part, or going to destroy the part, or you're going to distort the recoater, or sometimes both.
Yes.
So this forces you to put those support structures, and those support structures are actually not supports. What they are anchors preventing the part from lifting up. It's kind of like, when you have scaffolds in a building, you think of scaffolds as a structure that people can walk on safely. But if you are building in a hurricane area, the scaffolds are not only supposed to hold the people, they are supposed to be so strong that they will not fly under a hurricane force. This is how you should think about supports. The supports are about 1,000 times stronger than what is needed to support the part gravitationally. They are extremely strong, which is part of the problem. So if we talk about our hardware, the first thing that is very different about our hardware, is that really characterizes our machines, is a very, very different way in which we apply the powder. So the powder that we apply is applied using what we call a non-contact recoater. And the non-contact recoater allows us to apply powder where there is a gap of about a millimeter, 1,000 microns, or if you want, around 20 layers of building in the 3D printer, where there is a mechanical gap between the recoater and the part. How is it done? It's done by the recoater in one motion performing really three activities or three tasks, one after another, by basically a mechanism that is doing all these three tasks within few tens of milliseconds from each other. And the first one is we dispense from a top a curtain of powder. So think of that as kind of like a salt or spice a curtain falling on pizzas in a pizza factory.
Yeah.
Right? So you have this very thick layer of powder, almost waterfall of powder that is falling as the recoater is moving, and is burying everything with a very thick layer of powder. This thick layer of powder coverage is then followed by a blade that is really like a shear or like a knife that is cutting the excess powder It's not pushing powder, it's actually cutting the excess powder to leave a very flat plane behind that of powder. And the importance of that is that because it cuts the powder as opposed to pushes powder, it doesn't apply force underneath the layer of powder, because if you push powder, the powder is somewhere between a liquid and a solid, you apply forces under the powder. But when you cut it, you don't apply forces underneath that. The most magical part happens after that. After the blade is leaving this very flat layer of powder, there is a vacuum nozzle that is eliminating or removing about 1 millimeter of powder by sucking this powder as you go. And and this recoater nozzle, this vacuum nozzle, is very uniform, and it removes from every place a constant amount of powder. And as it removes the powder, you are left with a layer of powder that is 1 millimeter below the level where the blade cleared the powder. So now you have a gap of about 1 millimeter between the mechanical blade, the mechanical recoater, and the actual part that you are building. The implication of that is now you have a lot of tolerance for the part to warp before you actually have any mechanical contact with that. That allows us to apply very unique manufacturing processes that no one else can apply.
And this non-contact recoater is patented by Velo3D, right? And no one else has basically this technology currently on the market.
Correct. And it's patented by Velo3D. And the patents are covering a very broad set of inventions. So the recoater itself is patented.
Mm-hmm.
The function of a non-contact recoating is patented. So the function of a recoater that basically has a gap and does not apply force is patented. But there is also some system implications that are patented as well. So for example, we circulate about 40 times more powder than usually people move through their machines. So because we are applying a lot of powder, then removing 95, 97% of that, we are moving a lot of powder.
Yeah.
The management of this powder and the recycling of this powder is actually a non-trivial technical task.
Yeah, for sure.
And we developed a lot of technology to actually implement that, as well as patented a lot of solutions how to handle this powder.
Understood. And besides like these hardware innovations, something which really excited us for Velo3D is also like the software stack you had on top of this. So I think we could separate this basically in the flow software, or as you also do it, and in the quality management software. For this flow software, what's basically special about this?
Right. So what we learned is that when you are making different features, different physical features, you can optimize the manufacturing processes for the creation of those features. So we have a library of manufacturing processes, and this library of manufacturing processes are optimized for specific features. The software automatically detects those features in the parts that are prepared for printing on our machines, and prescribes for every feature the manufacturing process that's applicable to it to make it at the highest quality possible, at the highest performance and highest throughput possible. Now, the user can override the automatic selections, because sometimes the user knows things that the software doesn't know about the intent, the design intent of specific features. So the user can make selections and can guide the software to deviate from the automatic selections and to apply different rules and different manufacturing processes. The user selections and the automatic selections are extremely powerful. They are utilizing AI to take the fundamental selections or the automatic selections and apply them on thousands or tens of thousands of features in every part.
Yep.
And Basically, what this replaces is a very laborious process that involves a lot of development and a lot of black magic and trial and error that we already have developed solutions for a lot of features that now every customer can take advantage of the feature we developed for previous customers that are optimizing this manufacturing processes for these features. So there is a lot of richness in this software, allowing a very optimal manufacturing processes for a variety of geometries. So this is what this flow software does. It's a very intelligent software that prescribes the manufacturing process. So it takes a file, a design file from the designer, and then the user guides it, informing the software of design intent, and the output is a manufacturing file. And one of the power of this manufacturing file is that this manufacturing file can then be reproduced on every machine that we have. And I didn't touch upon this, but one of the unique features of the Velo3D solution or platform is that we create production files in the Flow software, and those production files can be reproduced on any of the Velo3D machines. So every Velo3D machine is calibrated and is auto-calibrated routinely to be able to produce reproducible outcomes from standard inputs. So if you provide it with the same file, it will produce the same output. It's kind of trivial for CNC machine. That's what you expect every CNC machine. That's what you expect every 2D printer. Every 2D printer does that without you having to think about this, but that has not been the case in metal 3D printing, and that's a very unique capability that we developed.
Yeah, totally. And I think something you touched upon is like basically if you design a file, normally you do it as a CAD file. And I think something which is unique about Velo3D is that you basically do also like the whole file management and also the printing with this file format instead of like formatting this into a different file format like STL or something else, which is used by other 3D printing companies.
Correct.
Yeah. Could you maybe talk a bit like about the advantages by doing this, also like from a customer perspective?
Yeah, so there is information loss by taking the CAD file and translating that into STL or other file format for 3D printing. If you take the original file format, it has the richest information, and when a manufacturing engineer is taking this file and is preparing the print instructions from that, in the file there is a lot of information that may not be present in the STL format or 3MF format or other tessellated format.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of information about design intent, and if you want your features to be a perfect replica of each other, it's much easier to do that with the CAD, because in the CAD you can very easily see that different features intended to be identical, and now you can make sure that the same manufacturing processes applied to all those features, and the software as well as the manufacturing engineer will make sure that you are actually applying the same processes everywhere to perfect uniformity, to perfect outcome. And it's much more difficult to do it with this transitionary file because of the loss of information.
Yeah, for sure. And besides this workflow basically in the design or like before you start printing, I think you also have a software for the whole quality control during printing and also like after printing.
Correct. So the third part of this technology suite is the Assure quality control software. And the Assure quality control software takes advantage of a very unique set of metrologies that we developed that allow us to get an insight about the health of the machine. We developed those metrologies to be able to understand the health of the machine and to be able to calibrate the machines. But as we did that, we realized, well, now this is a very powerful tool to be able to look at the production and see how well we are in control, how tight is the manufacturing process. So as we have done that, now we are building on those outputs, and we have created this, in the Assure software, this basically quality report or build report that allows you to understand how your print has gone, and whether the print was successful or not, and whether there was something in the print that was alarming. But the beauty of that is that we have an API that we allow customers to connect to, and now every customer can take the few tens of thousands of sensors that we provide and build their own quality control program around that. So the Assure provides a basic quality control, but the more sophisticated is the customer, the more sophisticated the quality control that they can build around this. And the team that is working here on this is led by a leadership coming from Intel. My background is in applied materials, from applied materials and semiconductor, but in semiconductor, it is the end customers, the semiconductor customers, the operators of the fabs that actually built the most sophisticated quality control schema in the world. And they have been looking at the data coming from the machines, they have been looking at the test results, and they have been building quality control and statistical process control tools to making sure that the production is as tight controlled as possible. We apply the same methodology now using in Assure, but our customers are not limited by the intelligence that we provide. They can take that and then can go to a level beyond that, 2 levels beyond that, 3 levels beyond that. The more sophisticated is the customer in quality control, the tighter they can control their manufacturing process. And this thing is actually very similar analog between 3D printing and semiconductor process. What has differentiated many semiconductor companies is how sophisticated they built their quality control insights into their production, how integrated they quality control in their production, and how tightly they could control, resulting in higher performance and higher yield on their chips. This is exactly what is going to differentiate in the next few years the leading additive manufacturing suppliers from everyone else. You have a lot of information in the machine.
Yeah.
How well you will be able to utilize this machine, this information, to tighten the distribution of your production will determine the leaders versus the laggards in this industry.
So that were like a lot of technical questions asked from us and like great answers from your side. But maybe if we would take a customer perspective, what is, if we would have to summarize all of these 3 areas, what is the buying reason for Velo3D machines compared to like the other manufacturers?
Yes. So when we look at the customers that have actually used us heavy in the most heavy way, in the most impactful way, I would say that the most important element, there are a few. So I'll start with the first one is you can set the production, and then the production is extremely stable over a very long period of time across many machines and across many variety of parts. And this stability, one of the main reasons for that is this very large tolerance of the non-contact recoater that eliminates a very large variability in the existing systems. The other thing is the ability to calibrate those machines so that they all reproduce the same results, allows customers to operate fleets of machines that are producing parts in a very consistent manner with very high yield and uptime. Our first customer is operating their machines at a yield, at an availability or utilization, that is above 90%.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. Yeah.
So this is a utilization that is high even in the world of CNC machines. So this is very, very high utilization. So when you master the use of those machines, they are extremely reproducible. They are extremely reliable in operation. It takes some time for people to master that, but once you master that, they are extremely consistent means of production.
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. Now let's talk about the future. So when you look at your the products that you have planned and how you develop your customer and growth, we see 3D printing at an inflection point where more and more productions will switch to additive manufacturing, where the software is available and so on. So how do you see for your company the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, so we have grown a lot in the last 2 years, and as we grew a lot and we expanded our footprint, one of the things that we did is we strengthened our customer support network. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to establish a solid manufacturing and a solid availability and reliability of the machines in the field. As we grew, we created a gap between the number of machines in the field and the amount and the knowledge in our customer support organization. So this is something that we have to overcome, and this is a debt that we have to our customers, and I don't want to have this conversation without them hearing this from me. If you look at the most fundamental level, what matters in this industry is the ability to make reproducible parts very consistently, very reliable, at an ever-reducing cost. And in semiconductor, there is this fundamental Moore's law that, Moore's law is not a law of physics, it's a law of people. People invented Moore's law and then followed it. But what we are seeing in additive manufacturing is a similar rule. I'm not sure that this is really following Moore's law, but it's what we see is that the production costs are dropping over time. And it's extremely important to drop the production costs, because as you drop the production cost, you can get more and more applications to become suitable to 3D printing. If you look at, and I want to touch upon this because this is really important to understand. If you look at, for example, car applications, a typical car costs around $10,000 to produce and weighs about 2,000 kilos. So the full car, kind of delivered to the customer at the cost of about $5 per kilo. That's a very, very low cost. And that includes all the chips that are in the car, that includes all the software, that includes a lot of relatively expensive things. So the metal parts that are in the car are actually sold at a price or produced at a cost that is literally on the order of $1, $2, $3 per kilo. That's the cost that it takes to make parts for cars. When you look at the powder that is going into 3D printing, the powder itself is on the order of between $30 and $150 per kilo. That's kind of the cost of the powder. When you look at the finished parts made by 3D printing, they are a few $100s per kilo, typically. But when we say that the parts are $300 per kilo, that's actually not true. The parts would be a few $100s per kilo, let's say $200 or $300 per kilo, if you tried to make a very large block of metal. But that's not what you are making. What you are making are actual parts that are very complex. And when you're making those parts, they are even more expensive than that. So they could be easily double or triple this part. So it's not unheard of to make 3D printing parts that are as high as $1,000 per kilogram. So then you basically say, okay, if I'm making parts for cars at $2-3 per kilo, and I'm making here $1,000 per kilo, what is it good for? And the answer is, there are a lot of places where $1,000 per kilo is actually a reasonable price for what you pay today in alternative manufacturing processes. This applies for aviation. This applies for space. This applies for defense. This applies for semiconductor equipment. This applies for energy systems, power generation systems. So if you look at this, a lot of highly engineered systems that operate in very hostile environments and that are produced at relatively low volumes utilize parts that are few hundreds to $1,000 per kilo. So in those applications, additive manufacturing could play a role. But when you look at those applications, there is the lower you reduce the manufacturing cost, you open a very, very large market for more and more parts in these industries that could be using additive manufacturing technology. So when you look at what we are working on and the roadmap is very clearly how do we accelerate the throughput of those machines in a massive way so that we can produce more dollars, more kilos for every dollar of production cost. and how do we accelerate that? And most importantly, how do we reduce the gap between the maximum theoretical limit of what the machine can produce and what it actually can produce on real parts? Because you pay an overhead when you are printing real parts compared to kind of filling the whole thing with one giant part. And this overhead of inefficiency is something that is really critical to improve so that you can basically approach the theoretical production capacity of the machine. So to summarize, all these markets become much bigger and much more available as the manufacturing cost drops. But it's only becoming so if you can meet the requirements for quality of those industries. All those markets that I just indicated are markets that are extremely sensitive to quality. They are extremely sensitive to material properties, to consistency, to reproducibility. So just reducing the cost is not enough if you are doing that at an insufficient quality. So we have to remember that the quality is completely negotiable in any of those applications.
All right. Benny, that was really, really interesting. So thank you for the deep dive into Velo3D. We are a happy shareholder here at 10x DNA. We like the combination of a very unique hard and software, and we also see some very nice growth ahead. Thank you for the time today, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you a lot, Benny.
Thank you so much.